Update for you. Here's what's going on. There was a major escalation in the war between Russia and Ukraine yesterday as one of Russia's largest weapon storage facilities was completely leveled by a pinpoint precision strike by the Ukrainians that could only have been enabled by Western ISR and artificial intelligence, because this took place 600 kilometers behind enemy lines, very close to Moscow, at least relative to the size and the distances traveled inside Russia. The Vladimir Oblast in District 20 here is just adjacent to the capital city of Moscow. In the Vladimir Oblast, the 51st Arsenal, GRAU, in Barsovo, Vladimir Oblast, one of the largest ammunition storage sites in Russia, was completely leveled by this attack. Now, the only way you can circumvent 600 kilometers of multi-layered air defense, which is only going to get hairier as you get closer to the target, is with some pretty sophisticated intelligence. Now, that's important because we are allegedly on the eve of some breakthrough peace talks, so they claim, that are about to happen in London this week. Now, I think that this is highly performative, and as we're going to talk about today, this is the typical good cop, bad cop strategy, and now we have an articulation of it thanks to Brian Berletic calling attention to an article that was written back in 2009 that outlines the very plan that is currently being used inside Iran. And we can extrapolate that to this current conflict in Ukraine. But what is happening right now is, despite all the performative conciliatory diplomacy that we're seeing between Witkoff and Vladimir Putin, Vladimir Putin's spokesperson today said that unless you hear it from the horse's mouth, which would be Dmitry Peskov, the spokesperson, don't believe it. The Financial Times put out an article saying that Russia was getting ready to make concessions on the Oblast and open to the idea of having the United States put troops inside the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant, okay? So there's a lot of disinformation circulating at this point in time, but unless you hear it from the Kremlin directly, there's a good chance you probably shouldn't believe it, because it appears as though, even by Western accounts, the Russians are the ones that have the upper hand, at least at this point. Now, I've never been one of those people who's been saying since the beginning of the conflict that Ukraine is finished. I've always been the person who's given the Ukrainians the credit they deserve, in that despite being vastly outnumbered, they still have been able to hold off the Russians. Now, of course, we all know that they're effectively fighting NATO, and that's who the Russians are fighting. Nonetheless, what we're seeing right now appears to be a message being sent by Washington. This is a kinetic message to Vladimir Putin himself, okay? Despite all of the performative niceties, that we mean business and that we are, in fact, willing to escalate, despite this phony divide between the United States and NATO, which the more and more this progresses, the more I'm convinced that that is all just a big smokescreen. Remember that incorrigible display of Vladimir Zelensky in the White House Oval Office? Well, that was supposed to limit the intelligence sharing between Ukraine. Now you're telling me that on the eve of a breakthrough in these talks, something that could potentially be reconciled this week, they would do something as egregious as destroying Russia's biggest weapons storage facility? Now, some people might say, well, that's just aggressive negotiation. But if you ask me, that's not going to win them any friends in the Kremlin, and that is just going to make people obscenely more hawkish, especially in light of the fallout around the world in the other various theaters of conflict. This explosion was so big that it actually sent out projectiles out to 10 miles in all directions. In fact, this is a neighborhood 10 miles away from the epicenter of the blast. I can't show you this because YouTube hates this kind of footage. But essentially what happened is either it was undetonated ordnance or it was a projectile, an artillery shell that was ejected possibly and then detonate until it hit the ground. But you were seeing that was just the first initial explosion. There were explosions raging throughout the day and night at the facility, which, according to satellite data, has been 90% destroyed. And when I say facility, that's an understatement, okay? You can see the size. This is a city behind here. Like, these are like city blocks. This is a massive, massive area. I don't know the square miles of it, but that was a major blow to Russia, and it's not getting a lot of media attention, guys. Now, before we talk about the revelations of one Brian Berletic with respect to this paper, which was written in 2009, which basically explains the strategy of U.S. manufacturing consent in order to go to war. And it's very important you stick around for this. I'm going to try to get him on the channel. I've been an avid viewer for many years, although I don't always agree with everything he has to say. But let's just talk about gold, okay? Because that's top of mind for a lot of people. Now, there is a massive tug-of-war going on. After I released my video last night, I released my video probably around here, and I said there's a good chance that by the time this video gets released, gold is going to hit 3,500. But towards the end of the video, I also gave myself a little bit of an out, and I said, well, who knows? Is it going to go to 3,300? Is it going to go to 35? It basically went to both. Okay, and here we are back at that magic number that the illuminated ones love, 33, 33, 30, and I can never seem to nail all 6 of them. But, you know, who knows? It might hover around this region for a while. This is normal consolidation. We need to remember that it was just a week ago. I mean, on Friday, we hit a new high, right? And I'm still in the mindset of wrapping my head around $3,000 gold. I mean, let's look where it was a month ago. I mean, a month ago, gold was at $3,000. So we're already 10% up. In a moving like that in gold, that's trillions of dollars, guys. So, you know, there's people who are, we've become so used to these wild, undulating swings in the market that we presume that that's normal. This is not normal. It's not normal for a $1 trillion tug-of-war on a daily basis in gold. I mean, historically, these are things that have happened, you know, at a glacial pace, but they're happening on a day-to-day basis, which is a sign of extreme volatility. And what it appears is what's happening here is, let me see if I have the slide here. Okay, so this is what's happening. So China wakes up on Sunday, right? The Asian markets open. They start pumping that sucker, okay? FOMO is alive and well in Asia. And then they're buying the physical stuff. China is stockpiling physical, okay? Everybody there is buying physical because they're not stupid. London wakes up and they're like, oh, good day, mate. Oh, no, that's Australia. I blew that one, didn't I? Anyways, they start selling paper. They're not selling the real stuff. They're not stupid, right? They're selling the paper to slam the price. And then New York wakes up and they're like, yeah, let's do it. I blew that one too. I was trying to do some kind of Bronx thing. But they put the final smackdown. And China came out the gates this morning and they tried to pump it. And they brought it back from the brink. But they almost had it back at 3,400. In fact, I think they did. The intraday range is 3,396. And then they capitulated once again. Look, we're still at I never even thought that we would see 3,500 maybe till the end of the year. The fact that we caught a glimpse of it and then it pulled back means that it's inevitable. And regardless, it doesn't matter. Because if you're smart and you're holding physical, I don't hold a lot of physical. I use it as a metric for chaos and disorder and entropy, because that's what it is. It's a reflection of the entropy within the system, essentially, especially the financial system, although not limited to that, militarily as well. If I had gold, it would be generational. I would never sell it. Why would you ever sell it unless you had to? You don't trade in gold to make a profit. It's to hold value of something, period, point blank. And unless it is not essential income, why would you ever sell it? So, you know, people always say hodl Bitcoin. No, there's only one thing you hodl, and you really don't typically ever have to hodl because there's not usually these wild vacillations in the market, except as of late. JP Morgan is now saying 4,000. This actually makes me suspect when mainstream media starts talking about it, as I indicated in my video yesterday, until the mainstream media comes on and says, hey, it's time for everybody to buy gold. And that's when you know they're going to sell into that FOMO. So this is on CNBC. I think it's on their finance page. It's not on their main page, although the price of gold should be front page. Now, this could very well explain the more dovish statements by Donald Trump today. I'm going to break the psychology of this all down because people are taking this way too literally. I mean, we are 3 months in to the biggest flip-flop, weather vane political run that we've ever seen, arguably, in history, and people are still taking everything this guy says literally, which you never should do. Believe only actions, okay? Never believe what do they say? Believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. And with Trump, I'd even, cut that by a margin of 50% as well. Now, let's talk about this paper because this is very important. Now, we also, before I get to this, there was a Boeing E-3B Sentry plane that was making its way to Israel. And this is fairly significant. So according to OSINT Defender, a guy I don't necessarily agree with about a lot of things, but he does have some good information. He claims that of all the military movements we have seen towards the Middle East over the last month or so, this one to me is the most, what does that word say? My ink's running out. The most telling that something is likely imminent. 2 U.S. Air Force E-3 Sentry airborne early warning and control aircraft arrived earlier today in the U.S. area of Central Command, area of responsibility from the Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. We know General Kurilla is going to be there, I believe, tomorrow for talks with Bibi. And Trump tweeted this out today. I've just spoken to the Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, relative to numerous subjects, including trade, Iran, etc. The call went very well. We're on the same side of every issue. Again, these statements are virtually meaningless at this point. Take them literally at your own risk. I would say, although, based on what I'm about to tell you, that there's a very good chance that everything we are seeing with respect to this diplomacy is performative. This is the Iranian foreign minister, and he just arrived in Beijing for high-level talks with Beijing about who knows what. Of course, they just inked the deal with Russia. So the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese are closer than they have ever been before in history. And did I mention the North Koreans? That's where we are at. Now, so if you think that this, Trump is just the tariff thing is done, then you're delusional. Okay, I'm going to get to that in just a moment. This paper was written on June of 2009 by the Saban Institute Center for the Middle East Policy at the Brookings Institution, which is a very prominent think tank. Which path to Persia? Operations for a new American strategy towards Iran. And the excerpt that I've extracted here is going to support the hypothesis that what the U.S. is doing right now is pretending to be the good guy in order to create plausible deniability when they inevitably go to war with the country. Now, listen to this, guys. This is, I have to give the credit for this to Brian Berletic. Okay, he was the first one to bring this to my attention. I believe it was actually after October 7th happened, but this is very important because it bears repeating because it's exactly what's playing out right now. Get a load of this. Leave it to Bibi, allowing or encouraging an Israeli military strike. This strongly supports the claim that U.S. planners considered using Israel to strike Iran as a proxy, allowing Washington to maintain plausible deniability. Now, they say, and I quote, a third option that they outline in this paper for how to deal with Iran is to persuade Israel, they don't have to persuade Israel to do anything, but they throw that in there, right? Initiate an attack on Iran. The great advantage for the United States is that it could allow Washington to be seen as a passive actor in the face of Israeli action. Okay? This section outlines that an Israeli strike could serve U.S. interests without directly implicating the United States, which is the essence of a proxy action. Maintaining plausible deniability. This would allow the United States to be in the position of having given diplomacy every chance while keeping open the possibility of supporting Israel after the fact, thus gaining the benefit of military action without any of the blame. This is how you manufacture consent with the public. Now, Trump already arguably has the political capital to do this, but this is just the icing on the cake to play it this way, and it also allows them to move all of their playing pieces into position under the covered smokescreen of, Yemen and all these other wars that are going on. This explicitly describes plausible deniability using diplomatic efforts as a smokescreen while preparing for military escalation through an ally. Manipulating international perception. If the United States allowed or encouraged an Israeli military strike, it might then use the ensuing conflict to impose a more coercive policy with the added benefit of a trigger that made it appear that Tehran had brought this whole thing on unto itself. And little old us, we were just minding our business, right? And the big bad boogeyman, Tehran, decided to start targeting the military bases that were just outside their borders that we just incidentally had there. This passage confirms that a staged appearance of reluctant involvement was a deliberate strategic option, making Iran seem responsible and allowing the U.S. to escalate with cleaner hands. This is back in 2009, but the strategy is all the same. Fabricated diplomacy to buy time or cover intentions. I mean, this is exactly what we're seeing right now, guys. While the language is more coded, the document discusses how engagement or diplomacy may be pursued in parallel with covert or preparatory military options. 6 stealth bombers at Diego Garcia, with diplomacy functioning partly as a narrative tool rather than a genuine effort, okay? The Ayatollah knows this. He's been around long enough, but I think a lot of his underlings, especially the foreign minister, doesn't exactly understand this, or perhaps is a bit more naive just based on the body language, but who knows? With diplomacy functioning partly as a narrative tool rather than a genuine effort, diplomacy can serve multiple purposes. Even if it does not succeed, it can help position the United States for more aggressive action down the road. This implies diplomacy is a stage prop, a tool to bolster legitimacy or delay judgment, not necessarily a good faith process. I mean, I could have told you that, but that articulated it way better than I ever could. So there you have it. That is what is happening right now. Remember weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which were proven. It was proven that Saddam Hussein didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, or if there was, they were destroyed. They went in anyways. They blamed them, they waited till September 11th happened. They needed that flashbulb event, which I think is what they need again. But I think in this sense, what they're going to do is allow Israel to provoke Iran. And then in the response to that, of course, through the whole thing, the United States has to appear as though they're at odds with this decision, right? Despite what Trump just said with being on the same page with Bibi. At this point in time, there's so much information. It's a saturated space. It's a completely different environment than we were in 2009, when people actually had a chance to stop and think about stuff, I mean, there wasn't much media back then. There was the news, but you didn't have the internet in real time, everything. So people could sit there and ponder and think and process things and think reflectively and analytically about these issues in a way which would likely compel them to be more resistant and express their concern with the decisions to go to war. Nowadays, there's just so much information that I think people are in a period of learned helplessness. So it appears as though gold is settling at the 33.50 mark. That's basically where it was last week. So we're still, we're still at the highs, I would say. Last week, I think the high got up to, let's just see here. I'm interested in this because I want to make sure I'm being accurate. So really, we're still higher. We're still, if it closes at this 33.53, that's still the second highest day in history for gold. And people are already like, oh, I don't know about this. Dude, the Chinese are buying what the West is selling because they need to contain this shit. Now, Trump came out today and he was making a lot of dovish statements. And everybody is mad, of course, as usual, right? The left is basically saying, ha ha, see, there you go, Trump folded. And of course, he didn't fold. And the right is, I suppose, celebrating the fact that, you know, they're going to view this somehow, spin it as a Chinese capitulation. Nothing has happened. All of these statements that you're making are future tense. They're conditional. There's fake news circulating. There's going to be a meeting with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump next week, and just copious amounts of scuttlebutt surrounding the issue. But, you know, I was thinking about something, because Trump is always making contradictory statements. And then I was thinking about it for a second, and I noticed that when Trump is sitting down, he appears to be more aggressive and hawkish in his speech. And the converse is true when he's standing for some reason. So I scrubbed this through ChatGPT because I figured, you know, something strange is going on here. If he's standing, the message is always seemingly dovish for the markets, but if he's sitting, it's hawkish. Now, of course, this is largely based on anecdotal evidence. Nonetheless, I think there's some truth to this, and ChatGPT seems to agree. So here's what it said about this phenomenon. Trump tends to make more aggressive or confrontational statements when he's sitting, especially during interviews or roundtable events, because the posture signals control and composure. A seated position often lowers physical tension, giving him more cognitive bandwidth to be rhetorically sharp or blunt, just generally more relaxed, being himself. It also frames him like the CEO at the head of a table, commanding, unbothered, and in charge. However, when he's standing, especially at rallies or press scrums, he leans more into performative bravado, using gestures and volume to hype up the crowd. But sitting allows him to deliver more calculated jabs, often with a smug or dismissive tone, which adds punch to the provocation. It's part body language, it's part strategy. Sitting equals scheming Trump, standing equals showman Trump. And typically when he's sitting, the signals are hawkish. You know, he's talking about effectively putting an embargo on China. Then he stands up and he gives the same speech and he's like, yeah, we're going to be, you know, friends with Xi Jinping. Although that's not what he said. Let's actually listen to what he said. Let's see if my volume is going to work today. Sometimes it doesn't work that well. Okay, let's go.
And our country is getting stronger all the time because the other was not sustainable.
With China, are you going to play hardball with them? Are you going to mention COVID?
Well, I'm not going to say, no, I'm not going to mention COVID. I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice. They're going to be very nice. And we'll see what happens. But ultimately, they have to make a deal because otherwise they're not going to be able to.
Okay, so that wasn't actually as dovish when you listen to it a few times. He's basically saying this is all on the condition that they make a deal. And there still is this desire for them to approach him, which is just silly because right now all the Chinese are doing, this is something that the Chinese embassy posted today. And well, Trump is, I don't know how accurate this is, 34, 84, 125 G's just drinking tea, right? Doing their thing because they've been stockpiling. They've been preparing for this moment. In fact, this is a visualization of a fraction of the Chinese fleet. Now, I'm sure if you put the American fleet on a table, it would be comparable in size, but considering they have, what is it, like 50 times the ship manufacturing capability as the US does. They only have 3 aircraft carriers, most of which are brand new, compared to the aging aircraft carriers that the United States has. Some of them are new as well. Nonetheless, it's the manufacturing potential that is important. So the Chinese are just, watching us fumble and make all these mistakes, seemingly. Now, he also makes some other statements here. I think this looks like it's the same clip. Just hang on.
Because the other was not sustainable.
Oh, yeah, that's the same clip. Why would I have the same clip twice? There was another clip where I believe he said something to the effect of the sanctions are, not the sanctions, the tariffs, Freudian slip there. They might as well be sanctions. The tariffs will not be 145% forever, but then he also qualifies that by saying unless China doesn't make a deal. So I would take none of this to the bank, okay? And remember, the gold was going up before tariffs, right? The price of gold was heading towards $3,000 during Biden's term. Let's just wind back the clock here. So this is the high point of gold back during the Biden era before Trump won. It was $2,800. So it already made massive gains before there was any talk of tariffs, okay? And then it kind of traded sideways for a bit till about January. And indeed, the tariff conversation started, but that's also when the arbitrage, the moving of gold from London to New York began. And so the trend just essentially continued. So this is something that's been ongoing for a while, which is why I don't chalk this movement in the primary metric of global financial health. I don't chalk that up primarily to tariffs. It's something much bigger. I think it's largely geopolitical. It's a sign that this is a genuine decoupling between East and West. Where should we go next? I think we're almost done, actually. This is an interesting graph. I just thought I'd show you this. And I don't know how accurate it is or how up-to-date it is, because it looks, yeah, I guess that would be about, doesn't show you what the end year is, but I'm presuming just by looking at it, this is 2024, 2025. So how many hours would you need to work to buy an ounce of gold? Okay, and so right now it's very, very high. Either that means that people are very underpaid, which I would say is probably accurate, that at this point in time, wages have not kept pace with inflation. And because of the global decoupling and the economic contraction that comes with it, it is inflationary at first anyways. That's likely going to drive those prices higher. And it could very well be that gold is overbought. I don't think so, because just the nature of the unprecedented global financial situation that we find ourselves in, anything is possible. The sky is the limit. We must remember that we're measuring it in US dollars. The last time it was this high was during the Great Recession. Mind you, in relative terms, I would say that the price at that time was higher, because we went up to 2,000 at the peak of the Great Recession. And I'm pretty sure in today's dollars, maybe it's starting to become equal, but you had all the COVID inflation, plus you had 2 or 3% a year in the run-up up to that point. So, and there was just a lot of QE still compounding and moving through the system, which is finally finding its resting point. So, yeah, is there going to be a regression towards the mean? It's very possible. Nonetheless, I would say that gold is still going to buy you an equivalent amount. This gold is going to buy you what it bought you back in 1999 when houses were relatively cheap. I remember a friend of mine had a very rich, he was the son of a very wealthy politician, okay, in our province. And they had a home, I believe it was like $250,000 that they bought it for. And this was a mansion. I mean, crystal chandelier and everything. It was rural, so it wasn't in the inner city. But nowadays, something like that would easily cost you a couple $1,000,000. So you're talking about, that's the real inflation in the real estate bubble, which hasn't fully deflated in Canada, although it has in the United States. So of course, the inflation numbers are highly manipulated. Peter Schiff has talked about that at length on the channel before. It looks like Rubio and Witkoff are going to sit out the talks in London with Zelensky. And this story has not been confirmed. Vladimir Putin offers to halt Ukraine invasion along the current front line. The Kremlin has denied this story, okay, from the Financial Times, who is a mostly reputable news source who usually leads the mainstream media in terms of the stories that they release. But in this case, I would keep a bag of salt around. So I want you guys to go and check out the interview that we did earlier with Jamarl Thomas. It's a 2-hour interview. I'm trying to give you guys as much to think about as humanly possible, all for the purpose of motivating you to continue to prepare. I hope the price of gold goes down, and it's a sign that things are easing a little bit. My intuition is that that's not going to happen. And if it does happen, it's going to be temporary. But if it does, that is when you want to prep, right? You don't want to prep at the top. You never want to buy at the top. And the fiscal metaphor is perfect for prepping. Never buy at the top. You buy low and then you sell high. That's the whole point of preparedness, is that those things that you need, you're not going to be able to get, and they're going to come at a much higher price when everybody else wants them. I mean, if you're a good prepper and you have the discipline to do this in the right way, in a way that is not emotional, then there's no reason why you couldn't actually be a good trader in the markets. Hopefully a long-term trader and not one of those crazy wild-eyed swing traders that just depressingly looks at, graphs all day non-stop and is just chasing the numbers. That would be a very, I don't know, in my personal opinion, that would be a very depressing lifestyle. But some people do it. Some people enjoy it. I won't talk about that today. We'll leave that for another day. Anyways, guys, this is the reality on the ground. So everything that you are hearing and seeing is just for optics. Believe none of what you hear and half of what you see. And then have that. And that's what you get. That's your reality. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.